Good morning, my warriors, those who are still here, still breathing, still showing up to life even quietly, even imperfectly. It took me 10 years to truly understand this, not because the idea was complicated, but because it was uncomfortable. And most of the time, we don't resist truth because we don't understand it, we resist it because it asks us to change how we live. Every morning, before you speak to anyone, before you check your phone, before the world reminds you who it thinks you are, something very quiet but very powerful is already happening inside you. Your mind is choosing how it will meet the day. Before we talk about discipline, success, or changing your life, let me ask you something simple. When you woke up today, did your mind immediately start racing? Thinking about what you need to do, what you didn't finish yesterday, what you should already be further along with by now? For many people, the morning doesn't begin with presence. It begins with pressure. A quiet sense of urgency, even before the day has properly started. We move quickly into motion, not because we're clear, but because stillness feels uncomfortable. We reach for our phones. We rehearse our worries. We prepare ourselves for a day that hasn't even happened yet. And somehow, without realizing it, the day starts running us before we ever choose how to live it. We like to believe our lives are shaped by big decisions, dramatic moments, turning points that arrive with noise and certainty. But Epictetus saw something most people still miss today. Life is shaped in much smaller places, especially in the moments when no one is watching and nothing seems important yet. The morning is one of those places. Epictetus lived in a world without alarms, without email, without social media, without the constant hum of urgency that surrounds us now. And yet he observed the same inner chaos, the same anxiety, the same feeling of being pulled by things we do not control. What disturbed him was not suffering itself, but how willingly people surrendered their inner freedom before the day even began. And that is where these lessons come from. This episode is not about fixing your mornings or forcing motivation. It's about understanding something Epictetus saw almost 2,000 years ago. That freedom does not begin with changing your circumstances, but as a way of seeing yourself more clearly. It begins with how you meet this moment, especially the first one, when your mind is most open and your habits are most honest. Lesson 1: you don't control the day, but you control how you enter it. One of the hardest lessons to learn, and one of the most liberating once it settles, is this. You do not control what today brings, but you do control the posture of your mind as you step into it. Most people wake up already reacting. They react to the sound of the alarm, to the weight of responsibilities, to the memory of yesterday, to the anticipation of what might go wrong today. And all of this happens before their feet touch the floor. Epictetus would say this is where freedom is quietly lost, not because life is unfair, but because we confuse reaction with reality. He taught that external events are not the problem. The problem is the judgment we attach to them, especially the automatic ones we never question. The morning gives you a rare opportunity to notice this process in real time. Before the world speaks to you, before your phone speaks to you, before your calendar speaks to you, there is a brief window where you can choose your inner stance. Not optimism, not denial, but clarity. What is actually within my control today, and what is not? This question alone has the power to calm the nervous system, because the mind relaxes when it knows what it is responsible for, and what it can safely let go. Epictetus wasn't trying to make people passive, he was teaching them how to conserve their energy for what truly belongs to them. Think about how many mornings begin like this. You open your eyes, and within seconds your mind jumps ahead. Emails you haven't read yet feel urgent. Conversations that haven't happened yet feel heavy. Responsibilities that are real but not immediate start stacking on top of each other. The body responds as if everything is happening at once. Heart rate rises. Breathing shortens. And without noticing it, you enter the day already braced for impact. Not because the day is hostile, but because your mind entered it defensively. Epictetus would say this is not awareness, it's conditioning. It's the habit of letting the first thought dictate the tone of the entire day. And habits feel convincing precisely because they happen quickly. They don't ask for permission, they just run. But the Stoic insight here is subtle and powerful. Between the stimulus and the reaction, there is a gap. In that gap lives your freedom. The morning, especially the first few minutes after waking, is one of the rare times when that gap is still visible. This is why how you enter the day matters more than what the day contains. Two people can face the same schedule, the same pressure, the same uncertainty, and have completely different inner experiences. One feels constantly under attack. The other feels grounded even when things are difficult. The difference is not strength or luck, it's orientation. One mind tries to control outcomes, the other commits to governing responses. When you apply this lesson in practice, it doesn't look dramatic, it looks almost boring. You wake up and instead of immediately reaching for your phone, you notice the first thought that appears. Maybe it's worry, maybe it's resistance, maybe it's fatigue. You don't argue with it, you don't judge it, you simply recognize it as a thought, not a command. You remind yourself quietly that some things today will go as planned and some won't, and neither of those facts defines you. What belongs to you is how you meet each moment as it arrives, not how you predict it beforehand. This small shift changes how the nervous system behaves. When the mind stops trying to manage the entire future at once, the body relaxes. Energy that was being wasted on imaginary problems becomes available for real action. You stop carrying tomorrow on your shoulders before today has even begun. And paradoxically, this makes you more effective, not less. Clear attention replaces anxious effort. Response replaces reactivity. This is why the morning is not just a time of day. It's a psychological threshold. Cross it unconsciously and the day pulls you along. Cross it with awareness, and you walk into the day instead of being dragged into it. That is the quiet freedom Epictetus was pointing to. Not control over life, but sovereignty over your inner stance. And once you taste that even briefly, you begin to understand that freedom is not something you wait for later. It begins the moment you choose how to enter what is already here. Lesson 2. Most suffering happens before anything happens. This lesson took me years to understand, mostly because it contradicts how we naturally think about pain. We assume suffering comes from what happens to us, from loss, conflict, failure, disappointment. But Epictetus noticed something more subtle and more troubling. Much of our suffering happens in advance. We replay conversations that haven't occurred yet. We anticipate outcomes that may never arrive. We rehearse worst-case scenarios until our bodies respond as if they are already real. And then we say, "Life is stressful," when in reality the mind has been working overtime creating pressure where none exists yet. Epictetus warned us about this tendency, not as a moral failure, but as a misunderstanding of how the mind works. He said we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and the morning is where this imagination often runs wild. When you wake up and immediately start thinking about everything that could go wrong today, your body doesn't know the difference between thought and event. It tightens, it braces, it prepares for danger. The practice is not to stop thinking, but to see thinking clearly. When you notice a thought as a thought instead of as a fact, something loosens inside you. That noticing is not passive, it is powerful. It is the moment you step out of the story and back into awareness. This is how the mind begins to rewire itself, not through force, but through recognition. In modern American life, this habit has almost become normalized. We wake up and immediately scan for potential threats, deadlines, messages, news headlines, social pressure, financial worries, social comparison. The mind doesn't wait for danger to appear, it goes looking for it. And because we live in a culture that rewards anticipation and preparation, this constant mental rehearsal is often mistaken for responsibility. But what's actually happening is quieter and more exhausting. The body is being asked to respond to situations that are not here yet. A meeting that hasn't started, a conversation that hasn't happened, a mistake that may never occur. And yet the stress response is already activated. Muscles tense, breathing tightens, attention narrows. By the time the day even begins, a large portion of your energy has already been spent. This is why so many people feel tired before anything difficult actually happens. Not because life is overwhelming, but because the mind has been living ahead of the body. Epictetus understood that this gap between imagination and reality is where unnecessary suffering multiplies. The mind believes it is helping, but it is often rehearsing pain rather than preventing it. In practice, applying this lesson looks very simple, and that simplicity is what makes it powerful. When a worrying thought appears in the morning, instead of following it, you notice the pattern. You see how quickly the mind jumps to outcomes. You recognize that this is anticipation, not reality. You don't need to push the thought away. You don't need to replace it with positivity. You just see it for what it is, a mental projection, not an event. Over time, this changes your relationship with stress. You begin to respond to what is actually happening instead of reacting to what might happen. The nervous system starts to trust that it doesn't need to stay on high alert all the time. And paradoxically, this makes you more capable, not less. You conserve energy for real challenges instead of imaginary ones. Epictetus wasn't teaching people how to avoid difficulty. He was teaching them how to stop suffering twice, once in the mind, and again in reality. When you learn to meet the day as it arrives, rather than as you fear it might, the future loses some of its grip, and the present, often overlooked, becomes steadier, clearer, and far more livable. Lesson 3: You are not the story you wake up into. Most people wake up and immediately remember who they think they are. Their job, their age, their past mistakes, their regrets, their limitations, their unfinished business. All of it rushes back in like a familiar but heavy coat. Epictetus would say this is another quiet surrender of freedom. Because those things are not you, they are circumstances, memories, roles, and patterns. But you are the one who is aware of them. This distinction is small, but everything changes when you begin to live from it. In the morning, before the world reinforces your identity, there is space to choose how tightly you will hold it. Not to deny responsibility, but to stop confusing your essence with your history. You are not your worst moment, and you are not even your best one. You are the awareness that has lived through all of them. When you remember this, the day becomes lighter, not easier, but lighter. Because you are no longer carrying the extra weight of believing every thought defines you. This is not philosophy for monks. This is practical psychology for daily life. The way you relate to yourself in the first hour of the day shapes how you respond to everything that follows. Most people don't realize how much energy is consumed by events that never actually take place. A single imagined conversation can drain you more than the real one ever would. You argue in your head. You explain yourself. You defend. You regret. You replay. And while nothing has happened externally, internally you've already lived through it multiple times. By the time the actual moment arrives, if it arrives at all, you are exhausted, guarded, and emotionally reactive. This is why so many people wake up tired even after sleeping. The body rested, but the mind never did. It stayed busy forecasting, calculating, preparing. Epictetus understood that the mind has a tendency to treat possibility as certainty. And when possibility is treated as certainty, the body responds with fear, tension, and urgency. This is not because the mind is broken. It is because it is trying to protect you. The problem is that protection, when unchecked, becomes self-inflicted suffering. Consider something simple. You're expecting a message today. You don't know what it will say. Before it arrives, your mind fills the gap. Maybe it will be bad news. Maybe it will disappoint you. Maybe it will change something you're not ready to face. Each version triggers a different emotional response. Anxiety, sadness, resistance. And all of it happens before the phone ever lights up. When the message finally arrives, it's often far less dramatic than what you already put yourself through. Epictetus wasn't asking people to stop imagining entirely. He was asking them to stop confusing imagination with reality. The discipline here is not suppression. It's discernment. You learn to ask, gently, is this happening now? Or is this something my mind is projecting forward? That question alone creates space, and space is what suffering cannot survive in. When you practice this in the morning, it becomes easier throughout the day. You start to notice the early signs, the tightening in the chest when a thought appears, the quickening of breath when you imagine an outcome. Instead of following the thought, you pause. You label it quietly, planning, remembering, imagining, and by naming it, you loosen its grip. The thought doesn't disappear, but it loses its authority. This is where many people misunderstand stoicism. They think it's about emotional suppression or cold detachment. It's not. It's about emotional accuracy, feeling what is actually present instead of what might be, responding to what is real instead of what is feared. When Epictetus said that people suffer more in imagination than in reality, he wasn't minimizing pain. He was pointing to an exit that most people never notice. Over time, this practice changes your relationship with uncertainty. The future stops feeling like a threat that must be solved in advance. It becomes something that can be met one moment at a time. You stop living 10 steps ahead of yourself. You come back into alignment with where your body actually is, where your breath actually is, where your life is actually happening. And something unexpected happens when you stop suffering in advance. You become more resilient when real challenges arrive, because you haven't wasted your strength rehearsing disasters. You have energy available when it actually matters. Presence replaces anticipation. Stability replaces constant vigilance. And the mind learns a new lesson. Not everything needs to be solved before it exists. Not every thought deserves your nervous system. This is how suffering begins to lose its momentum. Not because life becomes predictable, but because the mind learns to stay where life is, right here, right now, before anything has happened. Lesson 4: peace is not found, it is protected. One of the biggest misconceptions about peace is that it comes from removing all disturbances. Epictetus knew better. He lived in a world of instability, political tension, and personal hardship, and yet his writings are calm. Not because his life was, but because his relationship to it was. Peace, for him, was not the absence of challenge, but the refusal to fight reality unnecessarily. Most people exhaust themselves arguing with what is already happening. They argue with the past, with other people's behavior, with circumstances they cannot change, and this inner resistance creates far more suffering than the situation itself. The morning is where this habit can be seen most clearly. You wake up and immediately resist the day, wishing it were different, wishing you were different, wishing life would adjust to your preferences. Epictetus would gently remind us that reality does not respond to wishes, but our inner state responds very quickly to acceptance. Acceptance is not approval, it is alignment. When you stop fighting what you cannot change, your energy becomes available again, and that energy is what allows you to act wisely where you can make a difference. Peace is not passive. It is disciplined. It requires boundaries, especially in the mind. Most people think peace is fragile, something easily broken by the wrong message, the wrong tone, the wrong event. Epictetus saw the opposite. Peace is not fragile. It is resilient. What is fragile is our willingness to guard it. We give it away too easily, especially in the morning, when the mind is still forming its orientation for the day. Notice how quickly peace is traded for involvement. A notification appears. A thought about someone else's opinion arises. A memory of an unresolved issue surfaces. And suddenly your attention is pulled outward. Your inner space fills with arguments, explanations, imagined conversations. None of these are happening in reality, but your body responds as if they are. Energy drains, tension builds, and peace is lost not because it was attacked, but because it was left unprotected. Epictetus would say that not every thought deserves engagement. Not every emotion requires expression. Not every situation calls for your full attention. Discernment is the foundation of inner calm. Without it, the mind becomes an open door, and anything can walk in. In practical terms, protecting peace in the morning might look like choosing not to replay a conversation from yesterday that you cannot change. It might look like noticing the urge to check your phone and deciding to wait a few minutes longer. It might look like acknowledging irritation without feeding it with stories. These are small acts, but they are not insignificant. They are the daily training of sovereignty. This is where boundaries become internal, not external. You are not avoiding life. You are deciding how close certain thoughts are allowed to get. Epictetus taught that you do not have to attend every mental meeting you are invited to. Some thoughts knock loudly. Some arrive with urgency. But urgency does not equal importance. Over time, this practice reshapes how you experience challenges. Problems still arise. Difficult conversations still happen. But they no longer invade your inner space before they actually occur. You meet them when they arrive, not hours or days in advance. This preserves clarity, and clarity leads to better action. Peace in this sense is not a mood. It is a posture. A steady inner alignment that says, I will respond when response is required, and not before. This posture is what allows strength without aggression, care without overextension, and engagement without depletion. Epictetus understood that a calm mind is not one that avoids the world, but one that refuses to be scattered by it. And the morning, once again, is the training ground. How you guard your peace in the first hour teaches the mind what is allowed for the rest of the day. When peace is protected early, it becomes easier to maintain later. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become more deliberate about where your energy goes. And that deliberateness, practiced quietly and consistently, is what turns peace from something you chase into something you carry. Lesson 5. Discipline is an expression of self-respect. Epictetus spoke often about discipline, but not in the way we usually hear it today. He did not mean rigid schedules or self-punishment. He meant something more intimate, the ability to govern oneself. He knew what it meant to have no control over external conditions, but he also knew that inner discipline creates a kind of freedom that no one can take from you. Your morning routine is not about productivity. It is about trust. Every small promise you keep to yourself strengthens that trust. Every time you say you will wake up and reflect, or move your body, or sit in silence, and you actually do it, you are telling your mind that your word matters. This changes how you relate to yourself. Over time, self-trust becomes self-respect, and self-respect becomes confidence that does not depend on circumstances. Discipline in this sense is not harsh. It is kind. It creates stability in a world that offers very little of it. In recent years, discipline has developed a bad reputation. In modern culture, especially in the United States, discipline is often associated with burnout, hustle culture, and unrealistic expectations. People are told to wake up at 5, optimize every minute, track everything, and somehow still feel peaceful. When they fail to keep up, they don't question the system. They question themselves. Epictetus would immediately see the flaw in this. Discipline was never meant to turn you into a machine. It was meant to help you remain human in an environment that constantly pulls you in too many directions. In a world designed to fracture attention, discipline becomes an act of self-respect. Every app, every notification, every headline competes for your nervous system. Algorithms are trained to keep you reactive, slightly dissatisfied, always reaching for the next hit of stimulation. In this context, the ability to do one small thing on purpose each morning is no longer trivial. It is quietly radical. Think about how often we break promises to ourselves now. We say we'll rest, but we scroll. We say we'll focus, but we multitask. We say we'll slow down, but we speed up instead. None of this happens because we are weak. It happens because we are overstimulated. The result is not laziness, but erosion. Confidence erodes. Clarity erodes. Self-trust erodes. Epictetus understood that when you do not govern yourself, something else will. In his time, it was social pressure and fear. In ours, it is endless distraction and comparison. Discipline, then, is not about adding more effort. It is about reducing internal chaos. Applied practically, this might mean choosing a morning rhythm that is intentionally simple. Not 10 habits, 1 or 2. Something sustainable. Something you can keep even on difficult days. When you keep it, you send a message to your nervous system that you are reliable, that you do not abandon yourself when life becomes noisy. Over time, this changes how you move through the world. You stop looking outside for constant reassurance. You stop needing motivation from others. You begin to trust your own capacity to show up. This kind of confidence is subtle, but it is durable. It doesn't spike and crash. It builds slowly and stays. In 2026 and beyond, the people who will feel most grounded are not the ones who optimize everything. They are the ones who know how to return to themselves. Discipline, as Epictetus taught it, is a way back. Not through force, but through consistency. Not through control, but through care. And when discipline is rooted in self-respect, it stops feeling heavy. It becomes stabilizing. It becomes the quiet structure that allows creativity, presence, and rest to exist without guilt. In a culture that constantly asks more from you, discipline becomes the way you say, "This is enough for today, and I will meet tomorrow when it arrives." Lesson 6. Stop waiting for readiness. One of the most damaging beliefs we carry is the idea that we need to feel ready before we act. Epictetus never waited for readiness because he understood that readiness is often the result of action, not the condition for it. If you wait until fear disappears, you will wait forever. If you wait until conditions are perfect, you will never begin. The morning is not asking if you feel inspired. It is asking if you are willing. Willing to act while uncertain. Willing to move while afraid. Willing to begin again even if yesterday did not go well. Courage, in Epictetus' view, was not dramatic. It was consistent. It showed up quietly day after day in the decision to do what is within your control, regardless of how you feel about it. This is how momentum is built, not through bursts of motivation, but through steady, grounded action. In modern life, readiness has been rebranded as a feeling. We think we need clarity, confidence, and motivation before we move, but Epictetus would say this is backwards. Feelings are unstable. They shift with sleep, with news, with memory, with weather. If your actions depend on them, your life will feel inconsistent, even if your intentions are good. What he pointed to instead was something quieter. The ability to act without waiting for inner agreement. Not in a reckless way, but in a grounded one. You do not need to feel ready to do what is right for you. You only need to recognize that the moment is here, and that hesitation does not protect you from discomfort, it only prolongs it. Think about how often mornings are lost to internal negotiation. You tell yourself you'll begin after you feel more awake, more confident, more prepared. And those few minutes turn into an hour. That hour turns into avoidance. And by the time the day is underway, the opportunity to set the tone has already passed. Epictetus understood that action clarifies the mind far more reliably than thought ever will. When you take a small step, the nervous system recalibrates. Fear does not vanish, but it becomes workable. Uncertainty does not disappear, but it becomes navigable. Movement turns vague anxiety into something concrete you can respond to. This is especially important now, when so many people feel stuck not because they lack ability, but because they are overwhelmed by options and expectations. The culture tells you to wait until you find your passion, your purpose, your perfect plan. Epictetus would say that purpose is not found by waiting. It is shaped by repeated action in alignment with what you value. Practically, this lesson asks for one thing in the morning. Do one small act that moves you forward, even if it feels unimpressive. Write a paragraph. Make the call. Sit in silence for 2 minutes. Begin before your mind agrees, especially before it agrees. Over time, this changes how you relate to fear. Fear stops being a stop sign and becomes a signal, a reminder that you are standing at the edge of growth. Courage, in this sense, is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear decide your schedule. When you stop waiting for readiness, mornings become simpler. You wake up, you orient yourself, and you begin. Not perfectly, not heroically, just honestly. And that is enough. That is how Epictetus believed a strong life was built, one willing step at a time. Lesson 7. You are always training your mind. Perhaps the most important lesson Epictetus leaves us is this: whether you are aware of it or not, you are always training your mind. Every morning trains something. If you wake up and immediately distract yourself, you train avoidance. If you wake up and immediately worry, you train anxiety. If you wake up and bring attention to your inner state even briefly, you train awareness. There is no neutral start to the day. Even doing nothing is a form of practice. Over time, these practices become patterns, and patterns become character. This is not something to fear, it is something to take responsibility for. Because once you see it, you realize you are not stuck. You are simply practicing something that can be changed. This is why Epictetus paid so much attention to the ordinary moments. Not because they were small, but because they were repetitive. And repetition is what shapes the mind. You don't become anxious from one anxious thought. You become anxious from rehearsing the same pattern every day until it feels like your personality. The same is true in the other direction. Calm is trained. Clarity is trained. Stability is trained. And the training does not require hours of effort. It requires consistency of attention, especially in the morning, when the mind is still soft before it hardens around habit. Most people believe change requires intensity. Epictetus would say it requires accuracy. You don't need to overhaul your life. You need to notice what you are reinforcing. Are you training reactivity by immediately consuming information? Are you training helplessness by telling yourself the day is already too much? Or are you training steadiness by choosing, even once, to pause and orient yourself before engaging? In a world that constantly trains distraction, choosing awareness even briefly is a radical act, and it compounds. What you practice in the morning shows up in traffic, in meetings, in conversations, in moments of conflict. The mind does not suddenly behave differently later in the day. It follows the grooves it has already been placed in. Epictetus believed that philosophy was not something you read and admired. It was something you practiced until it showed up under pressure. The morning is where that practice begins. Not as a ritual to perform perfectly, but as a relationship you build with your own attention. If there is one thing to remember from this lesson, it is this: you are not trying to become a different person. You are training a different response, and responses are learned. They are practiced. They are shaped over time. Once you see that, the day no longer feels like something that happens to you. Feels like something you participate in. Not with control over outcomes, but with responsibility for how you meet them. That is the freedom Epictetus was pointing toward. Quiet, internal, always available, and renewed each morning whether you notice it or not. The quiet power of beginning well. Epictetus did not promise happiness, success, or comfort. What he offered was something more durable: inner independence, the ability to meet life without being owned by it. This independence does not arrive all at once. It is built slowly, especially in the quiet moments of the morning. You do not need to transform your life today. You only need to begin the day a little more consciously than you did yesterday. Before the world pulls you outward, return inward. Before reaction, notice. Before resistance, accept. This is not retreat from life, it is preparation for it. And it begins every day, the moment you wake up. This has been what we are, a space for exploration of consciousness, the truth of life, presence, and the simple miracle of being. This is not about learning something new, but remembering what you already are. And if this video resonated with you in any way, if it helped you see something a little more clearly, or simply helped you slow down for a moment, you can support this work by giving it a like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone you feel might need it right now. Those small actions truly matter. They help this video reach the people it's meant for, and they allow us to keep creating and sharing work like this, quietly, consistently, and with care. Thank you for being here, and thank you for listening.